With our first highlight talk for Dialogues, featuring Ryan Gander and Hamza Walker. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for everybody for coming, and let's get started.
Hello. This is a transcription of a lecture that I wrote about 12 years ago called Loose Associations, which is... It's a lecture, but people call it a performance lecture, but I don't call it a performance lecture because I have a feeling that if it was a performance lecture, I'd probably have to do it naked. So it's just a lecture, and people expect more when there's a performance, don't they? And I think that was the problem with the Millennium Dome in London, is that there was a high expectation, and it just turned into a big ice rink after the Millennium. So it's good to have no expectation, and then things can only get better. The lecture is Loose Association 1, and I've written one every year for 10 years. And when it ends, the next one starts. So if I was really energetic, I could chain them all together and do a 10-hour lecture, although I've never done that. But maybe I could do it for charity one day in the future.
Well, I'd like to start... I became familiar with your work through, it was at Frieze 10 years ago maybe, and there were a series of white wall-based works, like a white cover over a piece of green, some kind of green signage, the kind of signage, it's digital insofar as the signage is made up of these little hexagonal pieces of plastic that can then flip or change. And you had this white cover over, and they used to use them on buses. Now they use LEDs. This is before LEDs. But it was a white cover over top of what appeared to be some kind of signage, and there were only a couple of openings, and you could see you could see what it was, and you could see that it changed, but you could never read what the text was or what the message was. And there were two of these pieces up. And then there was the handout, or the title of the piece, maybe, is what told me that it was actually about vision and sight. So there was that. And I
You've
said,
got a better memory than me.
And then I said, who is this artist? This is a really great piece. And then they handed me a blue children's book. And they said, it's Ryan Gander. And I said, well, but this is a children's book. And they said, yeah, this is, and I think at the time that may have been your only publication. It's the second publication. And then I started reading it, and it really was a children's book, like a story. And I thought, wait a minute, the same guy that made the book made this piece. And like, yeah, it's the same. And they couldn't comprehend how confused I was, at that time. But I still remain in that state of confusion, which is...
That's good. I think confusion's a good state to be in.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of contemporary art lacks that.
Yeah.
I think like the works that I like the most, I'm really confused by, and they make me feel really uncomfortable.
Right.
But most people like work that they can stand in front of and be totally comfortable with, so then they don't feel abnormal. But art's meant to make you feel abnormal and a bit weird and a bit uncomfortable.
But it was funny how forthrightly one of the characteristics of your work, which would be this confusion, it's not a quality that runs from work to work as much as being confused, the confusion that accrues from work to work. So there's no stylistic marker as to what defines a Ryan Gander. And I think of that as the central core, in a way, of what you do. And you do a lot of what you do. I think of your output as quite amazing, you're quite prolific. But it is an authorless output, is how I've come to kind of make peace with my confusion. That each piece is, idea-driven. It could be a joke, in which case, you might only give me the punchline and not the rest of the joke. The punchline might be the piece itself. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the death of the author. It seems like really early on, you made a certain decision about not proceeding in any kind of stylistic fashion. And so this term that you're a conceptual artist, that bothers me for other reasons. But insofar as your pieces are, idea-based from one piece to the next, and they have nothing to do, and I don't want to call them projects. They can be large, they can be small, but they all seem to point to a comfort with the death of the author, or a more traditional notion of what the artist is. And where did that come from? How do you sustain that? I know writing is a big part of it.
That's you only have to ask that one question, and then I could talk for like 2 hours.
I told you I only had one question.
It's a massive question.
Yeah.
Before I answer that question, do you know when I first became aware of you?
No, I have no idea.
So I was on the motorway in my Renault Clio, which was navy blue, which my brother always said was the colour of a midwife nurse's car. Said, nothing, I just wanted you to know I'm watching you.
Oh, did I say that? Yeah.
And that was it. And then I said, okay, thanks, bye. And
really? I did that? Yeah. That's so not me.
It was very terrifying.
Wow, that's really crazy. I did stalk you, though.
There you go. Yeah, I know. I felt the fear of it.
Wow. I would never do that to somebody, but I did it to you. Why would I do that? Maybe it was because I was confused from piece to piece, and I felt like, who is he?
I think maybe you thought I was fictional and you were checking, or I was like an artist syndicate group or something.
Yeah, right. Maybe it was like a Rena Spaulding's kind of thing or something, or Bernadette Corporation, or I don't know, one of those entities. But yeah.
So, death of the artist, of the author.
And when you start,
that's hard. It's difficult.
But I feel like there's something going on, and maybe it could be generationally. What were some of your influences? In terms of being in school and then out of school, and a particular approach to becoming an artist. Like, what did these things mean to you that pushed you in a particular kind of direction?
I think personally, I've always been a bit. I think I have that. Is it ADHD? What's it called? Attention deficit thingy.
Yeah.
I don't think. Maybe I do have it. Maybe I don't. A lot of my friends and the people that I work with say I have it. But it's more just liking to start things and feeling excited about the potential of things, but not actually being that good at finishing them. So I start a lot, and then other people have to pick it up as I drop it and, pick up a cauliflower instead, So maybe that's part of it. And then I think the other thing is, if you're going to be an artist, if you can make a living at art and that's your job, you're incredibly lucky to do that, I think. And I think if I'm going to do that, I have to do it very morally and ethically and take it really seriously, and not just piss around and do stuff that I enjoy doing. I have to do something that's difficult and challenging and hard work, so my work ethic is engaged, and I have to take it very seriously. And the hardest thing that I could think of doing was every time I made something, starting from zero again. So denying the notion of practice, because practice is essentially a list of things that you've done before that you just wake up and you do them again every day, but you end up somewhere incrementally slightly different. And if you start at zero and you wake up, you don't wake up and you don't say, I'm a painter, and you don't say, I make paintings that are very big and they're on canvas stretched over wood, and I spread oil on the canvas and it's usually red. And you start and you wake up and you say, what should I do today? I'm going to be a racing car driver, or I'm going to design the uniform for McDonald's drive-through attendants, or, you just start at zero. You start at the very, very beginning of what should I do? And I think that's, if I'm going to contribute to art history, morally and ethically, I should be starting at zero. That's the most important thing. I should be contributing properly and seriously, not just doing some spray paint and smashing some mirrors and being a bit punk, you know? It doesn't suit me.
Wow. And it's funny that I wasn't expecting at all for it to come from that place, like it being a very early on moral.
Where did you
and
think
ethical.
it would come from?
I don't know. I thought it was more of a more strategic in terms of other looking at what artists did. I mean, you mentioned the idea of not being a punk artist and spray painting, so that there is some kind of notion about, in your mind about what a stereotype or a stereotypical way of engaging with the world that is known as being an artist, and this idea about moving away from that, but that you would center it as a moral and ethical one. Right?
It's quite ironic because actually, with this sort of ethical-driven practice, I could use spray paint or smash some mirrors or be a bit punk as well. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there is no authorship and no real signature. There's no traits that means that it comes from me, or there's no repetitive behaviour. There's just investigations of language and ideas. That's all it is. I could understand that spray paint, smash glass, and being a bit punk is a visual language that I could appropriate and use as a painter would use a colour. So it's probably stupid of me to say physical examples, because I would be open to making any type of art that looked like anything, because all styles are important.
Exactly, but their reduction to a trope is what you're mentioning here, and I kind of like that. Like, it's like only with the idea that this is understood as such. It's just a language, as opposed to But that would lead me to a question about what then is your investment in those different kinds of tropes. But I want to put that on the back burner and talk a little bit about what you said just then about it being an investigation of ideas. And it seems like the one thread in terms of your work ethic that runs throughout everything is your writing. And I just find it's like, man, you're just a torrent. I mean, you do so much writing out of which the pieces are generated. I feel like you must wake up in the morning, jump on the keyboard.
I do it on a dictaphone.
You do a dictaphone?
Because I live in the countryside, 2 hours from the studio in London, and I go there. I used to go a lot more, but I've got another kid now, so I'm a double dad, so I don't go as much.
Oh, wow.
I still work very hard, I just don't go to the studio. But when I was commuting in the car, I'd wrote the last book on the dictaphone and then just gave it to an intern to transcribe, which is funny because you write it totally different. It sounds like it sounds like I'm speaking now. It's conversational. It's not written. When you read it, it doesn't sound written.
No, it doesn't at all.
Conversational.
Right, which has something to do also with where to talk about, on the one hand, the death of the author. Then there's the issue of you in the work. And I know that question of autobiography was brought up in another interview, and you had people on both sides of the fence saying, no. Ryan's not at all in his work. And then on the other side, Stuart Bailey, whom I agree with, saying, no, Ryan, you are so in your work. And for me, you actually are in the work, and it is primarily through the writing that I do get a sense of like some kind of very restless mind. But so within the writings, and it seems like my colleague Yuri described your catalogs in a way as kind of their own internet of a sort, in which it's like a book inside of a book, inside of a book, inside of a book, kind of like a mise en abîme of thinking. But what are those moments that you decide to generate objects? Like, are there particular moments when things precipitate into art per se for you? There's form.
Yeah, there's no rules really. It's quite spastic. It's kind of like just very in the air, and there's always different reasons that I make a work. Some of the works are fallout of a text. Some of the works are an investigation because I want to see what something would look like in the world and how it would collide with other things and what sort of noises it makes. Yeah. But it's always different. There's never really a set, and it's important to keep that routine of making a non-routine in a way as well. It's like reading. Someone asked me recently, what type of books I read or what I was reading. And I think they expected me to say, I mean, what I would say if I was not an artist, if I was an accountant and I read, I'd say Paul Auster, Dave Eggers, books that I enjoy reading. You know, nice books to read, interesting, bedtime, literature. But I don't read that. I read underwear catalogues and books about handguns and crosswords and books about flower arranging, and because I have to be open to everything. It's the same as making art. If I just read books that I enjoyed, I wouldn't be taking my job seriously. I have to know a little bit about everything, you know?
Right.
Crosswords, Sudoku, everything. So I go to the magazine shop when I go on holiday and I pick a woman's magazine, a home decoration magazine, a magazine of fishing, and I just do it that way. And it's the same in a way of the way I go about making things. It's like trying to look outside of the way that you make things to find a different way of making things. So let me think of a good one. So I had a show in Paris last week, and at the dinner after the opening, I did an after-dinner speech. The after-dinner speech is written by a ghostwriter who I employed, who I tell a little bit of information about the context of the after-dinner speech, and then I ask him to write a speech that is the most difficult, challenging, and embarrassing thing that I could read after a dinner. And I've done 3 of them now, and they like to challenge myself to keep myself thinking and awake and excited. And I did one in Copenhagen, which was, some of them don't go so well because some of them aren't written for after-dinner speeches where I meant to do a speech as well. So I did one in New York at a Nike dinner, but it wasn't really my dinner, you know? I just went ding, 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 and, you know. But I developed that not as I want to make an artwork. I don't even know what the artwork is yet. I just know I do these speeches and 20 people hear them and then everyone goes home. I don't know even if there'll be a physicality or a fallout or a receipt of this action, but I did it because I think it's important that I try and make work in a different way so I learn something and understand something. So again, it's like an investigation. If the flip dot piece that you talked about, I could quite easily have been an artist who made the flip dot piece and everyone said, that's pretty good. And then you make another one. And you make another one and a bigger one. And you do blue dots, and then you do the dots on the floor. You make a public sculpture on a roundabout. There's loads of big dots. And then, I mean, it's very often the way the human mind works. But it's like, my dad's an engineer. He's retired, but he was an engineer in Vauxhall, which is General Motors in the States. So he worked in a factory, and he's not been trained in art. But he said to me, is this being recorded? Because I'm going to mention an artist's name. Yeah, it is. Is it going on the internet? Is this going on the internet, the recording?
That I don't know. I didn't sign anything.
Okay.
How about that for an answer?
Can I say it? If I say it and then we don't put it on the internet, is that all right?
They could edit it out.
I'm the boss. I can say what I want.
Yeah.
So my dad said he'd seen God, maybe I shouldn't do this. It's really dangerous. Is Rachel Whiteread here?
That's a loaded question.
Anyway, it wasn't me. It was my father that said it, so it doesn't matter. He said he watched a program on TV about Rachel Whiteread, and he said she casts the inside of objects. And I said, yeah, that's what she does. She casts the inside of objects. And he said, that's really weird because I didn't know you could do that. And I said, what? And he said, you do the same thing every day. She's done that for years and years and years. And I was like, well, you know, lots of artists do that. That's called practice. And painters do that especially. And sculptors just make one type of form. Brancusi, always lots of smooth stuff. You know, that's art, essentially. You just do the same thing, but different every day. And he said, but I thought art was like invention. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, because he's only followed what I do, he said, you wake up in the morning, you invent something, but what these other artists do is they wake up in the morning, they invent the widget, which is the plastic ball in a can of lager. Do you know that? To make it draft. So they invented the widget, and then they wake up the next day, and they don't invent a child-proof lock for the kitchen cupboard. they just make the widget again, which is such a weird. It didn't occur to him that artists could do the same things because it wasn't inventive, and by definition, it is not creative to do the same thing every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, are there any boundaries for you? I mean, it's nice to think of the different forms. Like, could be instructions for a performance. Somebody else could write the content in a way, or it could be a deck of cards. You know, it could be a children's book.
But isn't that exciting? Imagine having a job where you can wake up and do whatever you want.
It is. It's great. But it leads me to ask about what then. I feel like it's a donut hole in the center. Like, Elvis has left the building. Like, the artist has left or something. And now, since your work can take all these other forms, are there any? What then holds it together? In a way, as art. Then
investigations in language.
Really, so it is the writing and it is the line that makes it then like reflexive.
But I think I have this feeling that I don't know anything about brain chemistry, but I have this feeling, I've always imagined that there's a valve in the brain, and because sometimes I wander around and I see like a cigarette butt on a street corner and it's got lipstick on it and it's still smoking. In your mind, you don't think it, you just know in your mind instantly. This amazing thing, the mind. There was a woman standing on a corner on her own, waiting for someone to arrive. She was smoking, and it occurred in the last 4 minutes. And all that information is just in your mind in an instant. You don't think that; it's just there. It's totally instant. And I think sometimes we have the valve is open, and we see stuff, and we're like the Matrix where he goes, and you just take everything in, and you see this whole like structure of language and consequence and systems and knock-on effects and butterfly effects and all that. It's just really visible to you, and sometimes it's totally closed. And I think when I had Olive, my first child, I realised that when you're born, the valve is permanently open, and it closes with the baggage of life, with stigma of worrying that your opinion or your reading of art will be mocked. It closes with the busyness of everything that's around us. It closes with the speed that our life now goes at even more. And it closes, just this ability to imagineer and to think multidimensionally just disappears. And I go on. One of the reasons I came here to do the talk, but the other reason was I needed a couple of days to wander around a city and just, work, which is essentially keeping your eyes open and writing notes and taking photographs,
Yeah. So it's funny they're here, and I never know where to the extent to which you're really kind of romantic in a way. And it was nice hearing you talk about, your thoughts about, your child, right? And that offset expression, like, that, their eyes are wide open, or, using them as a paradigm for creativity and imagination.
Does this work, this button? No. Here you go. So maybe I can find a picture of there you go. So I could talk about this in relation to that. These are dens. So it's part of the human condition, isn't it, for kids to make dens? Everyone in here, I'm sure, has made a den.
We call them forts.
Do you?
A fort, yeah.
Everyone in here has made a fort.
Cushions,
we call them dens. Everyone's made a fort. I just watched my daughter making a fort out of a couple of chairs and a sheet, and then I realised that actually, firstly, when she's in there, this is a house. And I crawl in with her, and she says, "Do you like my house?" And I say, "Yeah, I like your house. But in my mind, it's 2 chairs and a sheet. But in her mind, it's really, really a house." That's the difference. Mm-hmm. It's that's anyway. So they're made of marble, and they're 3 dens that she's made. And whenever she makes one, I take photographs and then take the articles and set them up and then spray them with resin so they go hard, and then we'd make a mould, and these are poured marble, so it's marble with liquid resin, so it's a cast process not a carved process. So the process is instant because they're about this moment of realization, and carving takes a year. But it's also interesting, it's an investigation in development in a way, because the older she gets, the more she makes. They physically get bigger with the scale of her body, but also they get more complicated, they get more inventive, they get more architecturally complicated, you know? So it's sort of about her development in a way, yeah.
And when you spoke earlier, and this is to jump to something, but I think it's closely related, mentioning a moral or an ethical position in terms of how you would, that would set you along the kind of work that you would make, the position that you would take, but that you also wanted to start an art school, which I think, and now that makes a lot more sense to me in relationship to you talking about the moral and ethical position, about what does it mean to be an artist. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what drove you to want to start in art school.
So I've made a lot of works about art schools over the years. I designed one based on Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon Prison, a museum and art school together. And I made works in art schools where I'd steal the notice board and then print an entire image and then put over the notices and put them back. And so I've always had this, like, I wrote an educational manifesto, so I've always been interested in that. But really the reason that it's called Fairfield International, and it's in Suffolk, which is this seaside town where I live that's 2 hours outside London. And if I'm honest, the real reason why I'm doing it is because I'm a bitter, angry northerner with a chip on my shoulder. It's not, essentially, I get really irate with the money situation in the art world, where, I teach in London and I teach all over the place, but then I go up to Manchester or I go to, like, Sheffield or Leeds, and you meet an artist and they're brilliant. Absolutely, they're like potentially the best artist that you would ever meet. And obviously they're from a working class background, they're from a post-industrial city, they don't have any money, and they don't have this bloodthirsty ambition, so they're making work for another reason. They're not making work to be an artist, they're making work because they have to make art, because that's what they were made to, that's all they can do. But they all end up working in putting windscreens in cars, or working in McDonald's or something, or working in a phone shop, which is fine. Everyone has to have a job, but some of them could be really fabulous artists if they were given an opportunity. And then I go to the big, nice, posh schools in London, and there's a lot of artists who have wealthy spouses or trust funds, and they're really shit, and it makes me so irate.
Oh, that's so funny.
So that's why I'm starting. That's essentially that's the school.
It's really, British class relations, and the differences in the way that class relations are either, more readily articulated, either on this side of the pond or on that side of the pond at times. But it's funny the way it's more readily articulated in the art schools in London. And so Liam Gillick, it's like, this has come up time and time again. Darren Allman, Darren is a dear friend. It's like, no, I'm from Wigan Pier. Like, my father was like, it's like they wear this on their sleeve, that they come, what I'm from a working class background. And I just think of that as a really, it's interesting. I wasn't expecting that as not at all. But if you could talk more about it in a way, in terms of starting up
I guess from what I know of art school, having gone to lots of them and taught at lots of them and visited lots of them, is that a good art school. I don't know. I think it was Klaus Oldenburg maybe said a good art school is a warm room, which is like essentially it. That's all you need, isn't it? And I guess there's two currencies in art education, and one is time and one is space, but not really money, because the money doesn't come into it. The only way the money comes into it is their relationship to time and space. So, if you've got a job, you don't have the time to go to your studio. And if you don't have a job, you've got time to go to the studio, but you don't have a studio. So it's not really money. It's just to give 6 people 5 months of time and space in a beautiful medieval market town by the sea, in a Victorian school where they get an apartment and money to live and a studio, and then twice a week people come up to have supper. Astrologers and curators and chefs and all sorts of people.
Oh, so it's really open-ended.
That's the plan anyway. We're still in the process of buying the school because it's got Japanese knotweed, which is a massive pain in the arse.
Wow. So, in addition to the school, I know that you've got, and the talk was billed as talking about one of your upcoming projects, which led me to believe that it was either top secret or monumental, or maybe both. It begins with a P. I think it begins with a P.
Like a game show, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I can't remember. Where are you about to have a show? That it was about. We were supposed to talk about your upcoming projects.
We could just not talk about it because I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I know, but they made it sound really, really big.
And you got the program.
Yeah, and it was listed as a thing, and I thought,
We
wow,
don't-
I didn't get any information on this. All I got was the big new, kind of survey of the existing work. Not at all what was coming up. So I thought you would have.
I'll show some more. I know what we could do. I've got this video. Can I show the video?
Sure, of course.
Here you go.
When we're young, we use our imagination all day, every day. But imagination is more than just make-believe. It's the magic that makes the world a better place. Maybe that's why being a kid feels so good. It's something we should never grow out of. That's why we've launched Imagineering, an initiative to imagine and create a better future, not just for our children, but for us all. For more information, visit gov.uk/Imagineering.
It's a TV commercial that I made for the government, but the government didn't ask me to make it.
That's brilliant.
And there was the BBC did a program on me a few months ago, and the BBC's paid for by licence fee payers, so there's never any advertising on the BBC. And I managed to convince them to play it as an advert before the programme. It was the first ever TV commercial that was on the BBC, which is a bit of a great watershed in my career.
But what I like is how bad the commercial is.
Well, that's because it's made by a real advertising company. If I'd made it, it would have been brilliant.
Yeah.
But that's the first question about the authorship as well, is that I knew that if I'd made a TV commercial, I would have made something that didn't look like a TV commercial. So the process of making the work becomes the fact that I am the commissioner. So I play the role of the government, the person who is commissioning the advert. And then I have followed the whole process from start to finish, pretending that I was the government. So we'd have meetings and they'd pitch different ideas and different storyboards and treatments, and I'd play the role of somebody who didn't have an imagination but had been told they had to make a commercial that induced imagination in the children of Britain. And so I'd sit there and go, oh, it should be more blue, it's really irritating, and drink lots of coffee.
But it's funny, it just begins to point to... It's funny to come out with a product that is really bad, but then the punchline to me is you saying, it's like, but the government didn't ask for it. This idea of I'm going to produce, I'm going to have the imagination of being, what would the government produce?
But it's what they should do, isn't it? I mean, culture is Britain's biggest export, but any government that's ever been in Britain would not ever recognise that, or because it's not tangible, is it? It's like art. Imagination is invisible and it's productive, but you can't quantify or qualify the productivity of it. You can't. There's no statistics on it. You can't see the knock-on effect or the consequences in society. So you just ignore it and think about, it's like, how do we save energy? We need more people to turn off the lights. That's not really going to be the answer, is it? There's another answer that we've not thought about yet. It's always just looking at the question differently. So I thought that would be... It's also because there's a lot of cuts for art schools at the moment in Britain, so it was sort of related to that.
But but I feel like this reinforces a very cheesy notion about imagination and culture that a state would, in fact, continue to abide by, which then produces the kind of the ilk of art that I find myself drawn to, which then leads me to ask about the question of irony in this piece. Because on the one hand, and in other pieces, and what you were saying about a moral and ethical dimension about being an artist, would lead me to wonder, it's like, are you being tongue-in-cheek in this? Are you being ironic?
Irony is like a point of articulation in language, like humour or the grotesque. Or so I can use any of them. They're all tools, or they're all colours, or and I do use them. But in this, it wasn't. It was trying to stay faithful to the process. So it could have been a really bad TV commercial, or it could have been cheesy like it is, or it could have been been an award-winning, groundbreaking work of advertising. I just don't know. I went through the process, and it's almost like, we're having a conversation and we don't know where it's going and we don't know where it's going to end. And you just started with one question, and that is a productive thing. And sometimes you go to conversations, they're not conversations, they're questionnaires, And you would come here and you'd have 20 questions, and you'd say, what is your name? And I'd say, Ryan. And you'd say, how old are you? What do you think about Rachel Whiteread? Or whatever you'd say. God, stop the Rachel Whiteread jokes. And the great thing about a conversation is that you end up in a place where you don't know you would, at the start, you would be, So you learn something. So that's an investigation. And this, in a sense, I knew that I had to take my hands off the reins and let the process be true to the concept and not know where it was going to end in a way.
So that's
so there wasn't any purposeful irony,
right?
Although it does seem ironic.
Exactly right. But it's interesting just to have you clarify it in terms of, well, no, the piece is actually the process of working with the advertising company to actually, which is totally straight up, cash on the barrelhead, to come out with what they actually do, in that way. And that's really, really quite beautiful. But back to that idea about boundaries, I was saying, is there the kind of boundaries or the boundarylessness of what you do in relationship to other fields of cultural production? This ad seems just like it's like culture in the broadest sense is what you're interested in, right? Not simply in what it is that falls under the bracket of fine art. But what do you make of things like, contemporary art's relationship to design, where they seem like very cozy bedfellows these days,
Can you put the images back on, please? The microphone. I don't know. I understand them, but I understand the relationships between different disciplines and different ways of working, but I don't really... Oh, there we go, hold on. Everything's for the taking, in a way. Mm-hmm. It's more like... for me, my big ambition for my life is that I am as articulate and eloquent in visual language as I could be. The big game for me is being a magician of visual language, of every culture, all social history, cultural history, knowing everything and taking a little bit of everything and being able to, do magic. That's it's not politically motivated. It's not based in making. It's not based in making at all. Only if the making articulates a further idea. You know, it is just visual language. It's like, but the design question is interesting. The bedfellow bit, because that's what you said. Is that the term? Bedfellow?
Yeah. Because I on the I see you as playing an interesting game with something like that, where there are areas where you seem totally, interested in the question of design, the one. But then there are in other moments,
and recoil.
You're totally recoiling from it.
I mean, I'm interested in things that make the world better. So functional things are interesting. Architecture is interesting. But this work is about the bedfellowship of art and design in a way. Do you remember there was maybe 3 years ago this great moment in the recent history of art where lots of furniture designers became artists for about 2 years. Do you remember this? And there's still design fairs, but there was this moment where artists started making designers started making a chair, but it would be the price of an artwork, and they'd just make one. And it'd be like, well, that's art that you can use. Weird. Just seems so strange to me, all that. So I made a work that would see how those designers would feel. So I started making lamps. My wife needed a lamp, and
we have a show of Joseph Strauss opening on Sunday, so we have a sea of lamps in the gallery right now.
So my wife wanted a lamp, and she said she'd seen one on the internet, and it was too expensive, and I didn't like it. And I said, I could probably make you one better than that, being a bit handy in the shed, in the garden. So she said, you couldn't. And I said, I could. So I went out into the garden, I got some handlebars off a bike that isn't used. And there was a bucket of ready-mixed concrete, a garden hoe, the long-handled garden hoe. I got some flex. I just cut an extension lead, used the cable, and I just made this lamp that was a garden hoe in a bucket of concrete with some racing bar handlebars with the cable going through it and a bulb hanging off it. I sort of struggled into the house with it when it had set. I've made it. Ta-da! And she said, wow, that's pretty good, actually. And then I said, is it? I was like, oh, my God. Then the sun came through the window and the angels, ah! And then, And then I put it in a show. So it was called A Lamp Made by the Artist for His Wife. And soon Rebecca had a lamp made for the artist, by the artist for his wife, number 2. Because it seemed to be quite popular to have it in an exhibition as this functional thing that was a work of art, but a parody on this quasi-verso relationship between artist and designer. And I just keep making them. It's very strange. They're great wedding presents for friends, because when you get married, you usually move into a house. And they're really fun to make. I saw Rodney Graham at Frieze, and he said that he thought these lamps looked like the most fun art that you could ever make. And in the corner of my studio in Suffolk, there's just this huge pile of crap off the internet that I order. Bikes, lawnmowers, and I just... Me and my dad helps me, actually. He does all the soldering. And we just make these lamps of a Saturday afternoon.
It's great. You actually fell for the bait when you were going through the slides. I noticed and caught a glimpse of one of the lamps. And
really?
I wanted
so manipulative.
Yes, but I wanted away from the writing side of things as one kind of output. But it was very nice to hear you talk about them, because I suspected that they looked like, just like Rodney said, they looked like they were fun. And it's like Ryan actually made the lamp, like he actually went and made some sculpture, or did something.
I do make, because some of the work is about craftsmanship, and it is about, lots of things are fabricated. This is a painting, but it's not, you don't see the painting, so I make a painting of a person with a memory. So there was one that was, I can't say his name, a lad I went to school with when I was 5, and it was... the title was something like, what was his name? Andrew blah, 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 asking me if he could touch my penis, my bedroom, Upton, 1981 or something. So they're all, not that they're all pictures of me letting a boy touch my penis. God forbid. There's ones of my grandma and of artists, and it's just biographical moments. I picked a bad example, didn't I?
No,
I
but after we said, you said, you asked me, are you going to ask me questions about sexuality? And I looked at you like, it's like, no.
I thought I beat you to it.
Yeah, you did. Exactly. I thought we agreed. You became a dad. You gave up sexuality.
Exactly.
Like, no.
I'm nothing now. I'm just a dad.
Yeah.
So it's a paint. So I make this painting of a situation. It's not usually got a penis in it. Could be anything. But there's significant memories. So one is like a homeless guy who I bought a biro drawing off in Los Feliz village in LA. And one would be my daughter for her first day at school. So they're just biographical moments. And then the paintings essentially are really shit because I can't paint. So I put them in the bin, but the palette is shown. So this glass disc is the thing that I mix the paint on, which to me seemed like a good way to answer my need to be a painter, because I do need to be a painter because I have to try everything. And then the only way that I could find, apart from being Fontana and slashing the canvas or finding a way of talking about the weirdness of being a painter. Like, imagine if a Martian came from Mars and they saw a human being spreading coloured oil on cloth that was stuck to a wooden square. They'd be like, what are you doing? What is that? Do you eat it? You know what? There's no real way of understanding the phenomenon of painting at all. Not today, anyway. So I thought, I needed to make a work that was an answer to painting, and I often realised that my palettes were as interesting as the painting, because the only information that I was interested in was the image in my mind or the image in your mind. So you give a series of information to the spectator, and the information is the backstory, which is the situation of what the image would represent. And if we all read the same book, we all imagine Sherlock Holmes' 221B Baker Street totally differently from my life experience. So it works on that premise. But then also, the size of the glass disc is always different, and that relates to the size of the canvas. So I need a bigger palette to paint a bigger painting because I need more paint and more colours to mix. And then you see the colours, you see the amount of colours used, you see the tones, but you also see the reverse of the palette because it's glass. So you see the first colours that I put on the palette, not the last colours used. So you see the painting being made chronologically. So that's my trying to paint thing.
But it's also funny with painting, it just brings up that issue about visuality, And so before you were talking about with the advertisement, saying, no, the product is the product, but the process is what I wanted to maintain integrity to. Yeah. And it's funny here, it's like, even though the painting is gone, there's still, and I'd mentioned the first piece that I'd seen by you, which was about visuality, but it was like, negating that. And it still seems that you're sustaining this kind of negation of visuality, but in order to do it, you have to invoke it.
But I don't know if it's a negation. I think it's more of like, I think it's more generous to give the spectator space to imagine their own reality than it is to give everything to them on a silver plate and say, this is what it is. And then you have a 5-second buzz and you just walk on to the next work. The works that I love are works that I still think about. Mm-hmm. And they're not works that I would hang in my living room because they're works that are difficult and challenging and make you feel clumsy and awkward or scared or inhuman, or they're grotesque, or they make you cry, or you can't understand them. There's no way into them, or you understand them with your own relation to your own life. They're the works that stay with me. So I guess my criteria for making art that I think is good is making art that I would enjoy experiencing. And then it's always worked with space for my own intellect. Mm-hmm. So Yeah.
All right. Well, at this point, I think I'd like to open it up for questions.
I'm going to go through all the pictures while you do that.
Oh, I love this documenta. Unbelievable.
That one?
Is that? Yeah. Again, it's like the breeze. For those of you who saw Documenta, the Frederixianum, I thought Carolyn did a brilliant job of like the brain, right? But letting you have that big empty space where you created this breeze, you know, and the title of the piece, but the HVAC fans that had to be put in to do it that you couldn't see.
It's, a lot of people said, oh, you turned the air conditioning up. It cost like £500,000 to make the work. There's these huge like buildings outside with turbines in and all. And I was like, we didn't turn the air conditioning off. It's like 3 years research and development with Bonn University in Germany, and then people come and say, you turned the air conditioning off.
Brilliant. But again, I love this idea. You know, it's funny the dance that you would do with you know, non-visuality, or not against visuality, but things that aren't there, but they're you know, bigger than simply being seen.
That's it. Oh, there you go.
Oh,
so
is this one of the chairs? One of your?
Yeah, this is 2 Ritveld chairs, cargo. They're amazing. If you know them, they Ritveld. When Suriname was a Dutch colony, they'd send stuff to Suriname in these crates, and the crates were made of sections of wood that were this size. So Gerhard Ritveld had this idea that he could make affordable furniture that anyone could make in Suriname out of the crates. And all you did is you disassembled, they were called cargo furniture. You disassembled the crate, you put it together with some screws in another way, and you ended up with a phenomenally brilliant modernist chair that needs a cushion, but is brilliant. But all good-looking chairs need cushions. We live and learn. So this is... I had this idea that because of his process of making them, there was some sort of modernist magic dust in the wood, in the fabric of the wood. And I thought it would be an easy way to test that would be to give it to like a 5-year-old kid and ask all the pieces and ask them to make something. And they'd come up with like a crazy, messed up Tatlin's Tower, modernist, oozing structure. But they would never make a chair. So I did it with 10 children as a survey, and then wrote about it as like a science experiment. And so this is 2 chairs and a side table made by Diego in Bologna in Italy. The last kid, who was called Bia, made a cube. Totally disproved my...
He was going for Judd.
Really annoying, yeah.
Like,
I hate that kid so much. Ruined everything. And then we did...
Because he's not the future.
Exactly,
There's a child that is not the future.
How dare he have his own intellect? It's disgusting. And then I did one a couple of years later at the Van Gogh Museum with the great-grandchildren of Ritveld. So his 3 great-grandchildren came, and I gave them I did it as a performance on stage as a part of a museum night thing. And these 3, so I sit with them on the floor, and they just say, oh, I want these 2 bits to go together, and then I drill them and put it together, and they make whatever they want to make. And they made a chair, which was so brilliant, because it was like in their blood, you know, they couldn't help themselves. So that was a nice end to it all. Question?
Yeah. Oh, no, not at all. The pictures come up and then. But I also love that about your work. There's always the idea of work about work, or there's always some kind of, and you do make, you know, and it's pieces like this that made me ask the question about design, right? That seems to be a particular strand of your thought for some reason for me. But then the thing about art, which is another thing. So by this, you know, just as I would think of you as somebody who, the death of the author, dissolving a notion of the artist, you've also made a great number of pieces about art, you know, in art about art, and even like 3 degrees or 4 degrees removed, and literally with Ritveld's children or something. It's very, very funny to me. Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no questions,
I can't believe there's no questions.
Yeah.
Go.
Do you see your commitment to these different processes?
Oh, I got a microphone for you.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask if you saw your commitment to sort of diving into these different processes or using different processes as being related to like representing something honestly, or if honesty is like important to you, and if the processes are a tool for that.
Good question. Terrified. So like the palettes, the painting palettes. So I did a self-portrait of myself every day for a year. So there's 365, and the works are split into months. And I think that sort of relates to it because the process or the practice is only important to me conceptually. I have to distance myself from being an artist almost, to step outside so that I can look at myself making art to be able to make the work I want to make. Huh. So in that instance, I'm playing the role of an artist because I'm doing a practice every day. We seem to fit with painting. Does that answer it? Not really.
But I think honesty is an interesting one because as a characteristic or quality. I mean, I'd asked the question earlier about irony, but to almost flip the coin over, But I always think of the work of your work as being, it's like, even if it is ironic, you still wear it on your sleeve, so it's not necessarily cheeky. So I do think of this stuff as you do strive for a real measure of transparency, yeah. and I would call that quality honesty.
But I think if you thought about it like painting, honesty would be the colour yellow, and then you could say irony is purple, and you could say anger is burnt sienna. So, I mean, they're all equal to each other in a way, and they're all material. They're all there to be used as a tool or as a colour or as a swatch. It's not like I can just do one of them. I have to be good enough at my job to be able to do all of them and be able to jump to the next one when I think it's appropriate. And yeah, it's like, if you were, I think the big thing is like, so I made art for like 15 years maybe, and I think if I'd learned Russian for 15 years, I'd be pretty bloody good at speaking Russian, wouldn't I? And it's a bit like that. All these things are just like the way of articulating, but it's not Russian, it's just visual language. So honesty is just like a word, or just like a way of speaking or something. An inflection in the voice, or...
It's funny, I mentioned the word transparency, which makes me wonder about your relationship. Like, in thinking about your work, I think about Chris Williams. I was thinking about that, in his certain kind of like wanting to let you know everything, and Roberta Smith wrote a beautiful review of the show in which, she ended it with, and wait until you get to the catalog. It's like, just a beautiful, way to end it with him, like as if you weren't just like walking through it already in a way. But I was wondering, is he a figure that you think about or look at, or somebody in terms of as an art about art practice and transparency?
Williams.
Yeah.
I bought a work off him once. I don't think he likes me. So I bought a work off him. And I got a really good discount off the gallery. He's here. And then I made a work, I photographed his work because the work was of a lens. I re-photographed it, and I spoke to a copyright lawyer and worked out how much wall space I needed in the photograph so I couldn't be sued. And then I showed that work with his work as a set of eyes, and then resold the work. And then I don't think he likes me now. It was just, but I wasn't trying to make a profit. I sold his work for the same value I bought it for. I just sold mine for more than his. So it's totally fair, and it's
That's very honest.
It was motivated by pushing the boundaries of art history, so he should be happy with that. I don't understand.
There we go. God, I love it. Ask the question, get the answer, like in great detail.
Yeah, no, this is the first time I've spoken about it, apart from to my counsellor.
So there's somebody with a question in the back.
I hope this isn't going on the internet now.
Chris is a friend.
You're interested in process, and what I'm interested in is what's difficult for you, and it's so varied what you do. What's difficult?
What's difficult is trying to operate morally and ethically in a world that's saturated with the immoral and the unethical. And trying to be inventive enough and creative enough to think your way out of those situations so you don't start making art, because sometimes the art world's incredibly depressing and frustrating, especially with the current post-internet aesthetic. Aesthetic, is that a word? Aesthetic.
Aesthetic or aesthetic?
Aesthetic. Yeah. So that's quite hard. But, you know, all jobs are hard in different ways, aren't they? And it's probably quite challenging. That makes it more challenging, doesn't it? If you know, when you can... It's really weird because, like, a lot of art is... Obviously, the motivation is money and fame, isn't it? And I think if you're really good at the language and you understand how to speak very eloquently, then obtaining those things isn't that difficult. You just need to know what buttons to press where and how to do it. But then you also have to live with yourself, and you have to... I think of art in... for me, the way that I get around that, I think of art in three stages. I think of the production of artworks, the production of exhibitions, and the production of practice. And the thing that you have to concentrate on is the production of practice, the trajectory, the historical trail that you leave. And making exhibitions is just like making very sophisticated, elaborate artworks. So that's challenging and enjoyable. And then making artworks, when you've made thousands of artworks and, you know, you've thought your way around making art, it's making artworks isn't as challenging as it was when you start. So you have more time. The more eloquent you get at visual language, you have more time to think about the production of concise, interesting poetic exhibitions, and about your what you leave in the world, your legacy or your trail, and that's quite those things are important to me.
It's funny. I have just since you returned to it sounded like through that, and just based on your use of the moral and the ethical, it seems as it relates to the immoral or unethical, kind of art or something, and not to paint these things as black and white, but it seems like work, the ability to turn it into work for you, to make it work, a real labor, an honest labor, seems to be what you mean by moral or ethical. Am I reading that right?
It's part of it, yeah. It's one of the things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other things as well. Like, not to give spectators what they think they want because they don't know what they want. It's not a matter of being spectators asking, oh, I like this, I want this. It's a matter of the artist giving something that they think they don't know they want yet. That's important. So we all end up in a different place, and we all end up learning, and visual language is pushed, and the history of art is developed. Because if you give people what they want, which is the spray paint, the broken mirrors, and the punk, and the, I live in a warehouse kind of, I don't know, do they live in a warehouse, these people? Maybe. I've got a real house with bedrooms and a conservatory and everything. Then you don't end up anywhere. God, it's going to end up really doomy and gloomy, this conversation, isn't it now?
No,
Should
I have
never
a
got
question.
onto that.
Mine's really simple. I might have missed it in the beginning. Do you have work here at the expo or in the city that we can see
Yeah.
in person? Where?
Can't tell you. It's a treasure hunt.
Excellent. And the prize is?
You have to go around every stand and see if you... This is the challenge because there's no stylistic signature. You could spend 4 days looking for it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. It's really a treat.
Pleasure. Thanks.